Welcome back to the deep dive, everybody, and get ready because this is it, the season finale of season 5.
Wow, time flies, huh?
It really does. But before we say goodbye to this season, we've got one heck of a deep dive in store for you.
Definitely.
We're going back in time, back to the mid-1990s, to explore the JFK assassination through the lens of a newsletter called Fair Play.
Oh, this is going to be good. Fair Play is like a treasure trove of alternative theories and evidence that really challenge the Warren Commission's findings. It's like a window into how a researcher, a guy named John Kalin, was viewing the evidence back then.
And it's not just theories. We're talking primary sources here, witness statements, official documents, you name it. Kalin really went deep, and we're going to follow his lead. We'll be pulling out some of the most fascinating claims and evidence from these newsletters and seeing how they stack up against what we know now. So strap yourselves in for a wild ride through one of the most enduring mysteries of the 20th century, folks.
We're going to be uncovering some serious food for thought, challenging assumptions, and maybe even unearthing some new insights along the way.
Okay, let's kick things off with one of the first things that jumped out at me from Fair Play, Oswald's escape right after the shooting. Kellen presents this account from a witness named Roger Craig, who says he saw a man he believes was Oswald running down a hill near the Texas School Book Depository. This is just moments after the shots rang out.
And here's where it gets interesting. Craig goes on to say that this man got into a light-colored station wagon. The Warren Commission, of course, dismissed Craig's account.
Of course.
But Fair Play throws in this curveball. They point out these discrepancies in the testimonies. And get this, they even suggest that the station wagon might have belonged to, wait for it, Ruth Paine.
Now, Ruth Paine, for those who might not know, is a major player in the Oswald story. She and her husband had these connections to Oswald. Kellen really goes deep into their story, questioning their explanations about, buying a car around the time of the assassination and their attempts to distance themselves from Oswald afterward.
It gets you thinking.
It really does. What was the full extent of their involvement?
Right, exactly, if any.
Then there's this whole discussion in Fair Play about Oswald's possible ties to intelligence. Some folks believe he was recruited by U.S. intelligence during his time in the Marines. Maybe he was learning Russian or even infiltrating communist groups.
And then you've got the false defector theory where he was sent to the Soviet Union to spread disinformation.
Right.
And, you got to remember, we're talking about the 1990s here. Fair Play gives us the snapshot of how people were thinking back then, but so much has come out since then. Declassified documents, new witness accounts. So as we go through this, it's we got to keep in mind how these new pieces might change our perspective.
Absolutely. And speaking of new pieces, let's talk about Oswald's trip to Mexico City, just weeks before the assassination. Killen really highlights this trip in Fair Play, especially those visits to the Cuban and Soviet embassies.
And to make things even more interesting, Keelan includes excerpts from some documents that were recently declassified at the time. These documents actually reveal that the CIA was watching Oswald in Mexico City.
Hold on. Seriously?
Yeah.
So they knew about him and what he was up to?
They did.
Wow. That definitely throws a wrench into things. I mean, if intelligence agencies were already keeping tabs on him, what do they know about his intentions? Do they think he was a threat? Or was he just, another blip on their radar?
Right. Were there any missed signals,
Right.
anything that could have, prevented the tragedy?
Okay, now get this. Fair Play actually claims that some of Oswald's stuff, things like his diary and photographs, were messed with by the FBI.
Tampered with.
Tampered with, yeah, before they were given to the Warren Commission.
Mm-hmm.
If that's true, man, we're talking about a whole other level of conspiracy.
Absolutely. A potential cover-up. Killen presents his reasoning and evidence, but tampering claims are always super tricky, especially after so much time has passed. Proving it is incredibly tough. So I think we got to look at this with a good dose of skepticism, but hey, we got to stay open to the possibility.
Exactly. It's all about examining the evidence and thinking critically. Okay, so from tampered belongings, we move on to the medical evidence. And Fair Play doesn't hold back here either. Kellen focuses on what he sees as inconsistencies in the official autopsy report, the descriptions of JFK's wounds, the path of the bullet.
And one thing that Kellen brings up, which I find really interesting, is that there was no neuroanatomist, a brain expert, on those panels that examined the autopsy evidence.
Wow, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, how can you have a complete picture without that kind of expertise?
Right. And it's not about questioning their skills, but just acknowledging that being a specialist in one area of medicine doesn't automatically make you an expert on everything. And in a case like this, where every detail is crucial, having the right people is super important.
Caitlin even suggests that some of the evidence, including JFK's brain, might have been, tampered with. It's no wonder fair play got people talking.
Oh yeah, that's a bold statement. But when we talk about potential tampering, especially in a case like this, we got to think about the chain of custody. Who had access, and were there any opportunities for, things to get compromised?
Right. Now, we can't talk about the JFK assassination without bringing up the whole magic bullet theory, right?
It is single bullet theory. This is the idea that just one bullet caused all the wounds to both JFK and Governor Connolly. It's a major part of the Warren Commission's conclusion that Oswald acted alone. But it's also one of the most debated aspects of the entire case.
And Cal really digs into it. He
Wow.
questions the bullet's trajectory, examines the witness statements, and, really gets into the weeds with the physical evidence, or should I say, the lack of physical evidence. He really tries to poke holes in this theory.
And it's not just about the bullet's path. Governor Connolly and his wife, Nellie, both said they were hit by different bullets. And their accounts, along with all the questions about the physical evidence, make this magic bullet theory, well, let's just say it's still a hot topic in the JFK research community.
And Kralin, he puts it all out there. The evidence, the arguments, he lets you make up your own mind. He also goes into the witness testimonies, and man, are there some discrepancies. One witness that really stands out is Sylvia Odio.
Her story is wild, and it really shows how tricky eyewitness testimony can be, especially after something as traumatic as an assassination.
Right. Odio claims she met Oswald in Dallas weeks before the assassination. And get this, she says there were two other men with him.
Now, hold on, because it gets even more complicated.
Yeah, right.
Another witness, Lucille Connell, later said she saw Odio with those same men. But her earlier statements actually contradict Odio's story.
It's like a hall of mirrors trying to piece together what really went down. Was Odio intentionally misleading everyone, or did she just, misremember what happened?
It's hard to say.
Kellen really goes all in fair play.
Yeah.
He flat out accuses the U.S. government of covering up the JFK assassination.
Wow!
I know, right? It's a big claim.
Huge. And Kalen backs it up by pointing to things like destroyed evidence, potential witness tampering, and all these key documents that were kept hidden.
He makes a strong case, but proving a cover-up that big?
That's
Insanely difficult.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just point to shady stuff. You need rock-solid evidence that connects those actions to a deliberate attempt to hide the truth.
Absolutely.
And remember, all this is happening in the 90s, long before the internet and the massive amount of info we have access to now. Imagine what Kellen could have dug up with today's resources.
Right. He was working with limited tools compared to what we have now. But even then, he uncovered a ton of interesting stuff that challenged the official narrative. And that's what's so cool about fair play. It encourages us to think for ourselves, to question everything, and to keep searching for answers.
It's a reminder that the search for truth never really ends, especially with events that have shaped our world so profoundly.
Exactly. There's always more to learn, more to uncover.
Always. One thing that I find really cool about fair play is how Kellen pays attention to those small details that often get overlooked. Like, for example, he mentions that none of Oswald's fellow Marines ever called him Oz.
Oz.
Yeah, they always called him Lee.
That is weird. I mean, the nickname Oz seems to pop up all over the place after the assassination, so why wouldn't the people who knew him best use it?
Exactly. Makes you wonder where that nickname even came from, and whether it was even, a thing before Dallas.
Yeah.
And speaking of inconsistencies, Kellen brings up some interesting testimony from Gaetan Fonzie.
Fonzie.
Yeah, he was an investigator for the House Select Committee on Assassinations. He was looking into a lead involving Sylvia Odio and another witness named Lucille Connell.
Oh, right. Lucille Connell. She's the one who claims she saw Odio with those same men Odio had linked to Oswald. But her earlier story actually contradicted Odio's, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, you're right. It's just another layer of complexity in this whole tangled web of witness testimonies.
Yeah, definitely. It's a mess.
And Fonzie's testimony gets even wilder because he suggests that Connell might have had, ulterior motives for her statements.
Ulterior motives? Like what?
Yeah. He reveals that her husband had this mysterious job that took him all over the world. Fonzie hints that he might have had connections to intelligence agencies.
Whoa. So was she trying to discredit Odio on purpose to protect someone, maybe? Or was there something, I don't know, more sinister going on?
It's like a rabbit hole within a rabbit hole. Kellen doesn't just stop at individual witnesses, though. He tries to give us this big picture view of the whole political and intelligence scene at the time.
Okay, yeah. That's important context.
He quotes Fonzie, who talks about the chain of command in the CIA back then, describing it as way more chaotic and unpredictable than people think, especially when it came to stuff involving Cuba and Fidel Castro.
Yeah, that was the height of the Cold War. There was a ton of pressure on intelligence agencies to take action against anything that looked like a communist threat. You can imagine how that kind of environment might have led to, rogue agents or factions doing their own thing.
Right, exactly. Fonzie even suggests that some agents might have been working without official authorization, just going off personal connections and, like, past collaborations instead of following the rules.
So you're saying there might have been parts of the CIA operating outside the president's control, maybe even pursuing their own agendas.
It's a creepy thought, right?
It is, yeah. Like a shadow government working in the background, pulling strings, and no one can touch them.
And Fonzie, he actually met one of these supposed rogue agents, David Atlee Phillips. This guy was a high-ranking CIA officer, super involved in anti-Castro operations. Phillips actually sued Fonzie for libel after Fonzie wrote an article linking him to Oswald.
Wow, a lawsuit. That's intense. It shows you how far some people were willing to go to protect their reputations, their secrets. And, speaking of secrets, what about those declassified documents about Oswald's trip to Mexico City?
Oh yeah, those are key.
Oh.
Killen treats them like puzzle pieces, trying to figure out exactly what Oswald was doing there and who he was talking to.
Right.
There are cables between the CIA station in Mexico City and headquarters, reports on meetings with Cuban and Soviet officials. There are even transcripts of intercepted phone calls.
I mean, it's obvious that intelligence agencies were watching Oswald.
Totally. But the big question is, what did they make of him? Did they see him as a potential threat, or was he just like a pawn in this big Cold War chess game?
It all goes back to the whole challenge of understanding history. We have the documents, we have the evidence, we have the testimonies, but it's still just our interpretation.
It's true. We're trying to put together the past with only fragments of information, and there's always a chance we're missing something crucial. And Killen doesn't just take the evidence as it is. He questions it. For example, he has doubts about those backyard photos of Oswald holding the rifle.
Oh, right, those iconic pictures. He goes into the whole chain of custody for those photos. And he points out inconsistencies in the stories of how they were obtained and developed.
And there's more. He even suggests that the paper bags supposedly used to carry the rifle into the book depository might have been faked.
Faked. That would be huge. The possibility of evidence tampering in a case this important is disturbing. Makes you wonder about the integrity of the entire investigation.
No kidding. Killen also looks at how the autopsy evidence was handled. He points to a signed statement from the autopsy supervisor, Commander James J. Humes, admitting that he destroyed his original autopsy notes.
Destroyed them? Why would he do that?
Right. That's a massive red flag. It makes you wonder if info was intentionally left out or changed.
Absolutely.
And remember, this is all happening in the 90s, way before we had the internet and all the information we have now. Think of what Killen could have uncovered with today's resources.
He was limited, but he still managed to find a lot of interesting stuff that challenged the official narrative. And that's what fair play is all about. Thinking critically, questioning everything, and always searching for the truth.
It's a powerful reminder that truth is an ongoing journey, especially when it comes to events that have shaped the world as we know it.
You got that right.
One thing that struck me about fair play is how Killen looks beyond the evidence itself. He digs into the media coverage, public opinion, even the language used in official statements.
Yeah, it's like he's taking apart the whole narrative that was built around the assassination.
Exactly.
Huh.
He analyzes the way things were worded in news reports and official announcements and suggests that those words were, like, carefully chosen to sway public opinion.
Makes you think, doesn't it? It's a powerful reminder of how language can be used, especially during times of crisis, to manipulate,
Yeah.
to control the narrative.
Right. Like, how do we separate truth from carefully crafted stories, especially now when we're bombarded with info from everywhere?
Yeah, good point.
Killen's work really pushes us to be more critical, to question what we hear and see, and to seek out different perspectives.
Absolutely.
He's pretty critical of the media, too. He says they weren't skeptical enough of the Warren Commission's findings.
Yeah, I can see that.
Like, they were too quick to accept the official story without really digging deeper.
Right.
It's a reminder that a free and independent press is crucial, especially for holding those in power accountable.
For sure.
The media has to question authority, challenge assumptions, and present a balanced view, even when the pressure to conform is huge.
Absolutely. It's like Callan paints this picture of a society in shock after the assassination. Like, everyone just wanted to grab onto a simple explanation.
Even if it didn't answer all the questions.
Exactly, even if it left some loose ends.
And that's what fair play is all about, right?
Yeah.
It's about asking those tough questions, no matter how much time has passed.
Keeping the search for truth alive.
It's pretty inspiring to see one guy with just a typewriter, driven by this passion for truth, challenging the official story,
Yeah.
encouraging others to do the same. It's like Kellen shows us that we all have the power to question things, to research,
Yeah.
to keep searching.
Imagine what he could have done with the internet. Access to all those resources, all that information.
I know, right? It would have been a game changer.
Then to-
But even without it, he managed to find so much.
He did. And his work still sparks debate and inspires new research today.
So as we wrap up this season of the Deep Dive, what are the big takeaways from Fair Play?
What's the legacy of Kellen's work?
I think it's a call to action.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to challenge what you think you know. Explore different viewpoints. Keep asking questions.
Right.
The JFK assassination is complex. There's no doubt about it. There are so many layers, so much debate,
Yeah.
and it's up to each of us to decide how deep we want to go.
Absolutely. And don't forget, fair play is just one perspective on this. There's a ton of information out there. Books, articles, documentaries.
Right. The info's there, just waiting to be
Yeah.
discovered. And that's what makes this topic so captivating. It's an ongoing investigation, always evolving.
Yeah.
New info comes out, old theories are revisited, and the conversation goes on. So keep researching, keep learning, keep that curiosity burning.
It's been great joining you for this deep dive into the world of JFK research.
A huge thank you to our expert for sharing their insights with us.
Yeah.
And to all of you listeners, thanks for being here.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
Your curiosity is what makes this show possible. We'll be back next season with more mind-blowing topics and mysteries.
Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring.
And never stop searching for the truth. We'll see you next season.